The knock came at 5:02 the morning. Daniel Mercer heard it from his bedroom, where he had been lying awake for the past hour, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, the one shaped like a hand. The one he kept meaning to repaint. He was not asleep. He was rarely fully asleep anymore. But he was not expecting a visitor, and certainly not one at this hour. And when the knock came a second time, 3 sharp, deliberate raps, he sat upright in the dark and simply listened. He checked his phone. 5:02 a.m. Nobody knocked on his door at 5:02 a.m. Not the neighbors, who kept to themselves. Not his sister in Columbus, who called rather than visited. Not anyone who knew him in this town, because he had been careful over the past 4 years to make sure that very few people actually knew him. He pulled on a pair of jeans and a flannel shirt and moved down the hallway past Emma's room without making a sound. Her door was cracked open the way she liked it. He could see the edge of her blanket in the faint glow from the nightlight. 8 years old, and still sleeping the way she had since she was an infant, curled on her side, one arm thrown over the pillow, completely at peace with the world, in a way that had always struck him as something close to miraculous. He reached the front door, stood there for a moment, then opened it. The woman on the other side was not at all what he had expected, and yet some corner of his mind, a corner he had thought was long sealed shut, recognized her instantly. Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Meridian Group, age 36. The subject of 3 major profiles in the financial press in the past 18 months. Recently divorced from Garrett Hale, whose family name still sat on the company letterhead, even though it was Victoria who had built the thing into what it currently was. She was standing on his front porch in a coat that had cost more than his monthly mortgage payment, and she looked absolutely exhausted. "I need your help," she said, "and you are the only person I could come to." He stared at her. She stepped past him into the house. Daniel had moved to Harlow, New Hampshire 4 years ago, and the people who knew him there knew him as a quiet man who fixed things. He worked out of a small shop on Clement Street, Mercer Technical Services, a name deliberately bland enough to discourage curiosity, doing repairs on industrial equipment, HVAC systems, and the occasional electronics job for commercial clients in the surrounding county. He charged fair rates. He was honest about timelines. He did not over-explain, and he did not under-deliver, and the local contractors who used him regularly had come to regard him as one of those rare professionals who did exactly what he said he would do, and then left without requiring any further conversation. He was 34 years old. He had a daughter named Emma, who was in 3rd grade at Harlow Elementary and was currently obsessed with marine biology, specifically with the structural engineering of nautilus shells. He drove a truck that was 11 years old. He made his own coffee every morning and ate the same breakfast most days: eggs, toast, whatever fruit Emma wanted, and he went to bed at a reasonable hour, and he did not think very much, if he could help it, about the life he had left behind. The leaving had not been dramatic. That was the part that surprised people when they eventually found out, which almost none of them did. There had been no single moment of rupture, no confrontation or public falling out. There had been a gradual realization, over the course of about 6 months, that the person he had become inside that company was not a person he recognized or admired, and then his wife, Rebecca, had left not because of the company, but because of what the company had done to him, which was the same thing. And then Rebecca had died, 18 months after the divorce, in a car accident on I-93, and Daniel had taken Emma and moved north and built something small and quiet around the two of them, and told himself it was enough. Most days, it was. Emma had her projects. She had an aquarium on her windowsill with 3 goldfish named Pythagoras, Kelp, and Admiral. She had a notebook in which she drew diagrams of shells and labeled the chambers. She talked a great deal, and she asked excellent questions, and she had her mother's eyes and her mother's particular way of tilting her head when something interested her, and some evenings Daniel would watch her across the dinner table and feel a quiet, complicated grief that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with love. That was the life he had built. That was the life Victoria Hale had now stepped into. At 5:02 on a Tuesday morning in November. Without being invited. She had not sat down. She was standing in his kitchen, which felt immediately wrong. She was the kind of person who filled rooms in a way that required rooms to be adequate to the task, and his kitchen, with its slightly uneven tile, and the coffee maker he'd had since graduate school, was not equal to her. He put the coffee on anyway, because he did not know what else to do with his hands. "You know who I am," she said. It was not a question. "Yes. Then you know I don't do things without a reason," I assumed. He turned to look at her. "How did you find me? I've known where you were for 2 years." She said it plainly, without apology. "I had you located when I was doing due diligence on a potential acquisition. You came up tangentially. I had my team run a fuller profile. Then I filed it and didn't think about it again until 3 weeks ago." He absorbed this. "What happened 3 weeks ago?" "The divorce was finalized." She paused, and Garrett began making his move on the board. He turned back to the coffee maker. The kitchen smelled like old wood and the faint citrus of the dish soap Emma liked. Outside, the November dark was still total. In 40 minutes, maybe 50, it would begin to lighten at the edges. "Whatever you came here to ask," he said, "the answer is no. You haven't heard it yet. It doesn't matter. I left that world for reasons that haven't changed. Whatever you need, you can find it from someone else. There is no one else." She said it quietly, and with a flatness that told him she had thought this through carefully before arriving on his porch. "The board is split. Garrett controls 7 votes. I control 6. There are 3 swing votes, and all 3 of them are old-money conservative men who believe that a company should be run by a family unit. They have said this to my face, in different words, but they have said it." She stopped. "Garrett's lawyer sent a restructuring proposal yesterday. If he gets those 3 votes, I lose operational control within 60 days. Daniel poured 2 cups of coffee without asking. He set one on the counter near her. She did not pick it up. "And you want me to pretend to be your husband," he said, "for 6 months. Long enough to neutralize the board votes and secure the partnership review in February. After that, a quiet separation. No drama. Clean." He looked at her. She was not pleading. He suspected she had not pleaded for anything in a long time, and that the mere act of being here, in this kitchen, at this hour, was itself a form of vulnerability that cost her considerably. "You could have called," he said. "I needed to see your face when I asked." There was a sound from the hallway. Small feet on the floor. Then Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. 8 years old, and entirely rumpled, with her hair in the particular disorder it achieved overnight, and her eyes still soft with sleep. She looked at Daniel. Then she looked at Victoria. She was quiet for a moment, in the way children are when they are processing something new. "There's a lady in our kitchen," Emma said. "I see that," Daniel said. Emma considered Victoria with solemn attention. "Are you sad?" she asked. Victoria Hale, who had faced down hostile boards and aggressive financial journalists, and a marriage that had curdled slowly over 7 years, looked at this small girl and appeared, briefly, not to know what to say. "I'm tired," she finally said. Emma nodded as though this were an entirely sufficient answer. "We have cereal," she said. "Dad always says cereal helps." He gave her until Emma had left for school to say no again. And then he said it. And then she laid her phone on the kitchen table and showed him 3 documents, and he spent 20 minutes reading them in silence, while she sat across from him with her coffee and did not speak. The board minutes. The restructuring proposal. A financial analysis of what the company would look like in 2 years under Garrett Hale's proposed reorganization. He had not read a document like this in 4 years. The language came back to him immediately, the particular grammar of corporate power, what was said and what was meant, and the distance between them. He had been fluent in it once. He had helped write documents not entirely unlike these. "He's going to sell the infrastructure division," Daniel said. "Within 18 months. That's 340 employees, most of whom have been with the company for over a decade." "Yes." He set the phone down. "You built that division. From nothing." "Yes." He looked at her. She was watching him with that same flat, careful attention she had been watching him with since she arrived. And he understood now that she had known what was in those documents, and had judged, accurately, that they were more persuasive than anything she could have said. "You knew about my past," he said. "You said you had a profile run. Enough to know who you used to be." "Who I used to be," he repeated. "Walked away from an identical situation. A restructuring vote. A board that had decided to take the company a direction I disagreed with. I didn't fight it. I left." "I know. So why would you come to someone with that history?" She picked up her coffee, looked at it for a moment. "Because you left," she said. "Not because you didn't see what was happening. Not because you didn't understand it, but because you chose something else over it. That tells me something about your judgment that I trust more than I trust someone who's been inside this kind of fight their entire career and never had to choose." She set the cup down. "I don't need someone who wants this. I need someone who can do it and won't be ruined by it. Those are different things." He was quiet. 6 months, he said. 6 months. Emma stays out of it entirely. She is not part of any public presentation. Agreed. I want it in writing. The terms, the exit, all of it. I have a lawyer in Concord. So do I. She permitted herself something that was not quite a smile. She's very good. They met with both lawyers the following Thursday. The document that emerged was 31 pages long and covered, among other things, the precise conditions under which either party could terminate the arrangement, the geographic requirements of cohabitation, the scope of their public presentation as a couple, and the explicitly stated protection of Emma from any aspect of the arrangement. Daniel read all 31 pages. He signed it. He told himself it was because of the 340 employees in the infrastructure division. He told himself other things too, but that was the one he returned to most often in the days that followed. And it was not entirely untrue. What he did not tell himself, because he had learned that it was possible to keep certain thoughts at the edge of consciousness by simply not turning to look at them directly, was that he had recognized something in her, not her biography or her reputation, which he had known about only vaguely before that morning, but something in the quality of her stillness, the way she had stood in his kitchen and looked at the coffee maker while she said difficult things, as though the coffee maker were a useful object to look at when you were saying things you did not quite know how to say. The way she had answered Emma's question about sadness with the word tired instead, not deflecting, exactly, but finding the truer answer, the one that was personal without being vulnerable. He had recognized the posture of someone who had been building walls for a long time and was now standing in front of them, cataloging the exits. He had been that person. He was, he suspected, still that person in various ways he had not fully accounted for. He signed the document on a Wednesday afternoon in his lawyer's office in Concord. His lawyer, a measured woman named Diane Ashworth, who had handled his affairs since he had moved to New Hampshire, read the entire 31 pages with the methodical care of someone who trusted documents over impressions. She had asked 6 questions, 3 of which he had not anticipated. She had noted 2 provisions she thought were inadequately protective of his interests, and had successfully amended them before the meeting with Victoria's team was over. Driving back to Harlow, with Emma's school pickup in 40 minutes, he had thought about what he was doing with the particular clarity that came sometimes from motion and cold air. He was doing something complicated for reasons that were not entirely complicated. He was helping someone protect something that was worth protecting. He was doing a kind of work he was genuinely good at. He was not, he told himself, doing anything that required his life to change in ways he could not manage. He picked Emma up at 3:15. She had made a papier-mâché nautilus in art class and was carrying it with the careful attention of someone transporting a relic. He held it while she climbed into the truck. She told him about it for most of the drive home. He listened. That evening, after dinner and homework and the small ordinary procedures of bedtime, he stood at Emma's door and watched her sleep for a moment, a thing he had done since she was small, a habit that was part checking on her and part something he could not entirely name. And then he went to bed himself and lay in the dark and thought, very briefly, about what the next 6 months would require of him. Then he stopped thinking about it and slept. The company he had left 4 years ago was called Ardent Systems. It had been, at the time, one of the more promising mid-sized data infrastructure firms in the Northeast, with a proprietary architecture that Daniel and two colleagues had spent 3 years building from the conceptual stage through to a working deployment. He had been the technical lead. His name had been on 6 of the core patents. The betrayal, and he had come, over time, to call it that plainly, without softening it, had come from inside the founding team. One of the two colleagues, a man named Foster, had spent 8 months quietly negotiating with a private equity group, while Daniel was managing the technical build-out, and Foster was ostensibly managing the business development. When the deal was announced, the equity structure had been reorganized in ways that left Daniel with a percentage of his original stake and a severance figure that was substantial, but bore no relationship to what his contribution was worth. He had not fought it. Rebecca was pregnant. The legal path forward would have taken years and cost more than money. He had looked at the numbers and looked at his wife and made a decision. He did not regret the decision. He had come to understand, though, that not regretting a decision and being unchanged by it were not the same thing. What he had taken from Ardent was not bitterness. Exactly, bitterness required ongoing attention, and he had not wanted to give it that. What he had taken was a clear-eyed understanding of how power moved in corporate structures, and a set of technical skills that he had quietly continued to develop in the years since, and a determination never again to be in a position where someone else's choices could determine the shape of his life. Victoria had known some of this from her research. She did not know all of it. He did not tell her all of it, not in the first weeks, because there was a version of the story that was simply information and a version that was personal, and he had no particular interest in sharing the personal version with someone who had hired him, but the technical skills she had known about. That was part of why she had come. What she needed from him was not someone to stand next to her at functions, though that was part of it. What she needed, as he came to understand over the first 2 weeks of their arrangement, was someone who could operate inside a high-stakes technical and financial environment without either flinching or being impressed by it. Someone who knew what they were looking at. Her company had a problem. Beyond the board politics, beyond the divorce, there was a genuine operational vulnerability in the infrastructure division's data management protocols, a weakness that Garrett's team had discovered and was preparing to use as evidence of mismanagement in the board presentation. Victoria's internal team had not found it because they had been looking in the wrong layer of the system. Daniel found it in 4 hours. On a Saturday afternoon, sitting at her dining room table with a laptop and a cup of her very good coffee, while she stood behind him and watched him work, he showed her where it was and how to fix it. Then he showed her why her team hadn't found it, which was the more useful part. He explained it without condescension, which she noticed. "You could have told me this in the first week," she said. "You didn't ask me about technical systems in the first week. I asked you to review the infrastructure documentation. That's different from asking me what I thought." She was quiet for a moment. "What do you think?" she asked. He told her. It took 20 minutes. She asked good questions. He answered them. When he was done, she sat across from him and looked at the table for a long moment. "Garrett's people have been inside my technical team," she said. "That's my read. Then the board presentation is more serious than I thought." "Yes." He closed the laptop. "But it's fixable. You have time. If you move now." She looked at him, not the careful, measuring look she had been using since she arrived on his porch. Something different. Something that had less calculation in it. "Why are you fixing things in a shop in New Hampshire?" she asked. "Because my daughter likes it there," he said. And then, after a moment, "And so do I." The arrangement required them to be seen together, which meant, in practical terms, that Victoria came to Harlow on weekends and Daniel came to Boston during the week. He kept his shop hours. She kept her office hours. They had agreed, in the 31-page document, that their primary residence for the purposes of the arrangement would be her townhouse in the South End, but that Daniel's house in Harlow would be maintained as a family residence because Emma's school was there and Emma's life was there, and nothing about Emma was to be disrupted. Victoria had not spent much time around children. She had known this about herself in an abstract way. She and Garrett had not had children, a fact that had been a source of tension in the later years of the marriage for reasons she had not fully sorted through, but she had not quite anticipated the particular texture of Emma's presence. Emma was interested in everything. She had a quality of attention that was not demanding in the way of most children, but rather comprehensive, as though she were taking slow, careful stock of whatever was in front of her. She had asked Victoria, in the first week, what a CEO did exactly, and then had asked a series of follow-up questions that were, if Daniel's slight suppressed smile was any indication, not entirely unlike the questions a good financial journalist might ask. She had eventually concluded that it sounded like a lot of being responsible for things, which was, Victoria thought, roughly accurate. Victoria began bringing things when she came to Harlow. Not extravagant things, she understood instinctively that extravagance would be wrong, but small, useful things. A particular type of drawing paper that was better than what Emma had been using. A book about deep-sea invertebrates that she had found at a used bookshop near her office. Once, inexplicably, a very good kitchen timer in the shape of a lighthouse, which Emma had immediately declared perfect, and which now sat on the windowsill next to Pythagoras. It was not strategic. Victoria was honest enough with herself to admit that it was not strategic. She did not know entirely what it was. On a Friday evening in the 4th week, they were in Daniel's kitchen, making dinner, or rather, Emma was making a salad with considerable concentration, while Daniel handled the chicken, and Victoria was tasked with making the vinaigrette, a task she had been given because she had admitted she could not cook, and Emma had decided this was acceptable as long as she could do the dressing. The three of them were talking about whether nautilus shells were more efficient than snail shells from a structural engineering standpoint, which was Emma's current obsession. Victoria did not know the answer. Daniel knew more than she had expected. He had been reading Emma's books, she realized, keeping pace with his daughter's interests. The Fibonacci spiral, he was saying, is not just aesthetic. The proportional growth pattern means the shell doesn't need to be rebuilt as the animal grows. It's the same structure, accommodating more volume. Like how you can add rooms to a house, Emma said. Essentially, yes. Or a company, Emma said, and then looked at Victoria, including her in the conversation with that natural, unself-conscious thoroughness. Right? You said you started with just 12 people. 14, Victoria said. But yes, the same structure, more people. Emma nodded as though this confirmed something. Nautilus companies, she said, with satisfaction, and went back to the salad. Victoria looked at Daniel. He was looking at Emma with an expression that was entirely unguarded open, in a way she had not seen him be with anyone else. A warmth so straightforward it was almost startling. He felt her look and turned, and for a moment, they were simply two people in a kitchen, looking at each other. He turned back to the stove. She added lemon to the vinaigrette. The kitchen smelled like olive oil and something herbed, and outside the November dark had settled in, and the lights were warm. And Victoria Hale, who had not felt at ease in a room for a very long time, felt, unexpectedly, at ease. The February board presentation was preceded by 6 weeks of escalation that Daniel watched from the inside, with the focused attention he brought to complex systems, tracking inputs, modeling outputs, watching for the points where pressure would concentrate. Garrett Hale was not a stupid man. He was methodical and patient, and had the particular advantage of men who have spent their entire lives in environments designed to reward them. He moved with a kind of ease that could be mistaken for competence, and he cultivated, in the people around him, a reflexive deference that had long since stopped requiring active effort to maintain. He had, in addition to his 7 board votes, a communications firm that was quietly circulating unflattering narratives about Victoria's leadership in the financial press. He had a legal team that had filed 3 procedural motions designed to delay the board's review of his restructuring proposal, giving his narrative more time to circulate. And he had, Victoria's investigators had confirmed, 2 people inside her infrastructure division who had been providing him with documentation. Daniel addressed the documentation problem first, because it was the most concrete. He spent 2 weeks, in the evenings after Emma was asleep, going through the division's document access logs and building a timeline that showed not only what had been accessed but when and by whom, and what the access pattern suggested about intent. It was methodical work, the kind he was good at. And it required no authority or position, only access to data that Victoria could provide legitimately. When he brought her the analysis, she read it without speaking for 20 minutes. "This is enough to take to the board," she said. "It's enough to show the board that the narrative they've been given is built on selectively sourced data," he said. "That's not quite the same thing. But it's a start. What's the rest?" "The rest is that your infrastructure division's actual performance numbers, correctly attributed and correctly contextualized, are substantially better than what Garrett's presentation is going to show. The mismanagement narrative depends on reading the metrics in a way that ignores two relevant variables." He showed her. She understood it immediately, which he had expected she was. Underneath the political positioning and the board maneuvering, genuinely capable. She had built the company. She knew what she had built. "I need you in the room," she said. "I'm not a board member. You're my husband." She said it with the flat precision she brought to operational facts. "You have standing to observe, and if I need you to speak, I'll introduce you as a technical consultant who happens to also be my husband. And if any of them want to challenge that in the room, they're welcome to." He looked at her. "You're going to enjoy this," he said. He did not mean it as criticism. "I haven't enjoyed much lately," she said, which was the most honest thing she had said to him in 8 weeks. The board meeting was on a Thursday. The room was on the 22nd floor of a building in the financial district, with the kind of view that was designed to remind people where they were in the order of things. Daniel sat along the wall, behind Victoria, with a laptop and a set of printed materials and the particular quality of stillness he brought to high-stakes situations. Garrett's presentation took 40 minutes. It was polished, and it was well constructed. And it would have been devastating, Daniel thought. If the underlying data had been clean, Garrett spoke with confidence, and his financial team answered questions smoothly, and 2 of the 3 swing vote board members were visibly persuaded. Then Victoria presented. She did not rush. She walked the board through the corrected metrics, the contextualization, the document access analysis. She was precise, and she was thorough, and she was, Daniel thought, excellent at this, the best version of what she could be in an environment that had been designed to make her doubt herself. At one point, one of the board members asked a technical question about the infrastructure division's data architecture that was beyond what Victoria had prepared for. He could see the slight hesitation, a beat shorter than anyone else in the room would have noticed. "Mr. Mercer," she said, without turning. "Can you speak to that?" He stood. He answered the question directly, in plain language, without preamble. He answered 2 follow-up questions. Then he sat back down. The 3rd swing vote shifted. He could see it happen. The shift was not dramatic. It was a quality of attention, the particular way a person in a leather chair at a long table straightens slightly, or ceases to write on the notepad in front of them, or turns to look at the person beside them to calibrate a reaction. The board member's name was Harold Crew, and he was 71 years old, and he had spent his career in the kind of industrial manufacturing that was entirely unromantic about the relationship between operational data and outcomes. He had not, Daniel thought, been persuaded by Victoria's presentation in the way the other swing vote had been persuaded through trust in her competence or loyalty to her history with the company. He had been persuaded by the numbers being right. The difference mattered. Daniel sat along the wall for another 90 minutes, while the board discussed, asked questions, and eventually called the session to a preliminary vote. The vote was 9-7. Garrett Hale, who was seated at the table in his capacity as a board member, and who had not spoken since Victoria began her presentation, gathered his papers with a deliberateness that suggested he had not yet accepted what the morning meant. He would accept it, Daniel thought, but not today. Victoria said very little in the elevator down. She was doing the things she did when the operational part of her mind was still running, processing, cataloging, moving the session into memory, and beginning to plan the next phase. Daniel recognized it and was quiet. A junior member of her communications team said something about a statement to the press, and Victoria said she would handle it herself, and that was the end of the conversation. On the sidewalk outside, it was raining. February rain, cold, and with no conviction. Victoria turned up the collar of her coat. "Thank you," she said. Just that. Harold Crew was going to come around regardless, Daniel said. The numbers were right. You prepared the numbers. You built the division they came from. She looked at him for a moment in the rain. Then she said, "There's a car coming. Do you want to?" And he said yes, and they got in, and neither of them said very much on the ride north. But the silence had a different texture than it had had in the morning. Less taut. Something that had been under pressure for a long time had been released, and they were both, in their separate ways, adjusting to the new shape of things. After the board meeting, there was a period of about 2 weeks during which Victoria withdrew. Not dramatically, she kept their scheduled appearances, answered his messages promptly. But there was a quality of removal in the way she carried herself around him, a careful management of distance that he noticed and did not push against, because he understood it. He understood it because he had felt something similar when Emma had first started calling Victoria by her name rather than the lady, and then, a few weeks later, when Emma had started including Victoria in drawings of their household at Harlow, matter-of-factly and without being asked. The drawing had shown Daniel at the stove, Emma at the table with her shells, and Victoria at the counter doing something on a laptop, and it had been labeled, in Emma's careful third-grade printing, "Dinner time." Daniel had seen it when he picked Emma up from school, and he had looked at it for a long moment before folding it carefully and putting it in his jacket pocket. He did not know what to do with the feeling that had accompanied that small piece of paper. He had been careful, over the 4 years since Rebecca, not to want things he could not have, or things that were not his to want. It was a discipline he had built carefully, and it had served him well. But discipline and want were not the same thing. The withdrawal, he thought, meant she felt it too, and that it frightened her. He thought he understood why she had just extracted herself, at considerable personal cost, from one entanglement that had started as something manageable and had ended with it shaping her entire life. He did not think she was in a hurry to be reshaped. He gave her the distance. He did not make it pointed or awkward. He was simply, as he had always been, present without demanding anything of the presence. One evening she called him, not with a question about the company, but without apparent purpose. He was in the kitchen. Emma was doing homework at the table. He stood by the window and talked to her for 20 minutes, about nothing consequential, the weather in Boston, a book she had read, whether the lighthouse timer had been a reasonable choice. He looked out at the Harlow Street, at the November dark, and the lights in the neighboring houses. "Emma put you in a drawing," he said. A pause. "I know," she said. "She showed me a version. She draws what's real to her." Another pause. Longer. "I know that too." He did not push it. He said good night. She said good night. He went back to the kitchen and helped Emma with her fractions. What he did not tell her, on that phone call or any of the ones that followed, was that the distance she was maintaining had a shape. He recognized it was the shape of someone approaching something they wanted and did not trust themselves to want. He recognized it because he had maintained a version of the same distance for 4 years, with a precision that had served him well and cost him things he was only beginning to accurately inventory. He thought about this sometimes in the evenings, after Emma had gone to bed and the house was quiet. He was not a person who spent much time on introspection for its own sake. It struck him as a discipline that, like certain kinds of exercise, could be taken to the point of damage. But there were evenings when the house's stillness had a quality that was not quite peaceful. And in that quality he was honest with himself about what he was feeling, which was that the life he had built, for all its genuine sufficiency, had a dimension that was missing, and that the missing dimension had been more visible to him in the past 4 months than in the 4 years preceding them. He did not tell Victoria this. He was not ready to. And also, it was not the kind of thing you said to someone who was already making a careful effort to maintain appropriate distance. You waited. You gave people room to find their own way to what they were going to find, because rushing it never worked, and he knew this from experience. He waited. The story broke on a Wednesday in the 5th month. A financial news service ran a piece under a headline about Hale Meridian's boardroom turmoil, and buried in the 4th paragraph was a reference to Victoria Hale's newly formalized relationship with a technical consultant from rural New Hampshire, with a suggestion that the relationship's timing coinciding neatly with the period of maximum board instability raised questions. The piece was short but precise, in the way that pieces designed to suggest without proving are precise. The questions multiplied quickly. By Thursday afternoon, there were 3 additional pieces. By Friday morning, a financial analyst who had an audience was speculating openly that the arrangement might have been a deliberate boardroom maneuver, and that, if it could be shown to be so, the board would have grounds to revisit its February vote. Daniel had known this was possible. He had known it from the first week. The 31-page document had included provisions for exactly this scenario. What he had not fully accounted for was Emma. Her teacher called on Thursday afternoon. A parent had asked questions at school pickup. Nothing directed at Emma, but enough for Emma to sense that something was happening around her. She came home quieter than usual. At dinner, she asked, with the direct precision she had apparently inherited from somewhere, "Is Victoria in trouble because of us?" He said no. He said it as honestly as he could, which meant he also said that some people were saying things that weren't true, and that sometimes people did that, and that it wasn't about her. Emma had looked at him for a long moment. "Is she okay?" she asked. "I think she's handling it. You should call her." He had called. Victoria had answered on the second ring, and had been efficient and controlled, and had told him that her legal team was addressing it, and that he should not worry. She had not asked how Emma was. She had not asked how he was. She had been, in the space of a 3-minute conversation, entirely the version of herself that existed before kitchens and dinner tables and lighthouse timers. He understood. The armor had gone back on. It was what you did when you were being attacked. But understanding it, and not being stung by it, were again not the same thing. She chose, in the public response her communications team issued, to say nothing. The official statement was a single sentence, acknowledging the board's decisions and declining to respond to speculation. It was the right strategic call. It left the story without new material to feed on. It also, implicitly, left him undefended. He did not ask her to defend him. He knew why she hadn't. He understood the calculation. He moved back to Harlow full-time and told himself this was the right shape of things. He had been back in Harlow for 3 weeks when she appeared at his door again. It was not 5 a.m. It was 7:30 on a Saturday, and it was snowing lightly, and she was standing on the porch without a coat, which meant she had come directly from her car without stopping to think about the cold. He opened the door and did not say anything. "I handled it wrong," she said. "Yes. I know what I did. I'm not here to explain it. I'm here to say it was wrong, and I knew it was wrong when I did it, and I did it anyway because I was frightened, and I defaulted to the only mode I know how to operate in when I'm frightened, which is containment." She stopped. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to hear it said plainly, and not because I think it changes anything or obligates you to anything." It was snowing. A light, patient snow. He stepped back from the door. She came in. Emma was at the kitchen table with her shells and her notebook. She looked up. Something in her face went very still, the way it did when she was deciding how to handle something carefully. "Hi," she said to Victoria. "Hi," Victoria said. Emma looked at her for a moment. Then she pushed her notebook across the table to a corner and said, "Do you want breakfast?" Dad made the good eggs. Victoria sat down. Daniel made coffee. Neither of them spoke for several minutes, and the quiet was not empty. It had weight and texture, the particular weight of things that have been waiting. "The board vote held," she said, eventually. "The February decision stands. Garrett's restructuring proposal is formally off the table. The infrastructure division is intact. Good. I filed the technical documentation with the board as a matter of record. With full attribution." She paused. "Your name is on it." He set a cup in front of her. "You didn't need to do that. I wanted the record to be accurate." She looked at the coffee. "The 6 months are done. Technically, the contract terms have been satisfied. You're not obligated to any further." "Victoria," she stopped. "Are you here because of the contract?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the snow was still falling. Emma had opened her notebook again and was drawing with intense concentration, apparently committed to providing them privacy by means of deliberate disengagement. "No," Victoria said. "I'm not here because of the contract." He sat down, across from her. The same kitchen table where the 31 pages had been signed, where the vinaigrette had been made, where Emma's diagram of nautilus shells was still tacked to the wall. "Tell me something true," he said. She looked at him. The CEO face was still there. It was always there. It was part of the structure of her, but underneath it, in the set of her mouth and the way she was holding the coffee cup with both hands, there was something that looked like a person who had been afraid for a very long time and was tired of it. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Not the way you do it. The evening things. The dinner. The drawing on the wall." She gestured slightly toward Emma's notebook without looking at it. "I don't have the I never learned how to," she stopped. "Started again. I'm afraid I'll be bad at it." "You already know how to bring the right paper," he said. "You already know how to ask the question Emma wants to be asked. You've been doing it for 5 months. She looked at him. "Being bad at something," he said, "is not the same as not being able to learn it." Emma, without looking up from her drawing, said, "She's really good at vinaigrette." Victoria laughed. It was brief and slightly surprised and entirely real. It changed her face. Daniel watched it happen. The 2nd December brought a light that was different from November's, less pewter, more blue at the edges, arriving earlier by increments. Daniel noticed it the way he noticed most things. Quietly, over time, without making a particular production of the noticing. Victoria had taken to spending Fridays and Saturdays in Harlow. Not because the contract required it. The contract had been formally closed in a brief, undramatic exchange of emails between their respective lawyers in late November, but because she came, and he did not ask her to leave, and Emma had begun assuming her presence with a naturalness that did not allow for ambiguity. She had taken a guest room for the first 3 weeks of this arrangement. Then, on a Friday in the 3rd week, she had stayed up late, helping Emma finish a school project about bioluminescent organisms. And by the time Emma had gone to bed, it was past 11, and the roads were icy, and Daniel had simply said she should stay. And she had, and in the morning she had made coffee before he woke up, and the coffee had been, somehow, exactly right. The company was stable. The infrastructure division had, in the 4 months since the board vote, expanded its client base by 11%. Garrett Hale had resigned from the board in January. Quietly, the way men do when they understand the field has shifted. Victoria had hired 3 new technical leads. And she had asked Daniel to review the candidates, and he had. And the 3 people she had hired were good. He had not returned to any version of his old career. He did not want to. What he had done was add, to the Mercer Technical Services client list, a consulting arrangement with Hale Meridian that was modest in scope and appropriate to what he actually wanted to be doing, which was mostly still fixing things in Harlow and reading about nautilus shells and making dinner on weekday evenings. Emma had begun calling Victoria Vic in the way she called Daniel Dad, not dramatically. Not as a decision, but as a linguistic drift that reflected the actual shape of things. Neither of the adults had commented on it. On a Saturday in early February, the anniversary, more or less, of the board presentation, Daniel woke at 5 and lay in the quiet for a while, and then got up and went to the kitchen and started the coffee. The house was still. Outside, there was a light snowfall, the same patient kind as December, and the street was empty and blue-white in the pre-dawn. He heard footsteps behind him. He did not turn. Victoria came to stand beside him at the kitchen window. She had one of the wool blankets from the guest room, her room now, more or less wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was not done. She was looking at the snow. The coffee maker finished. He poured 2 cups, set one in front of her. She picked it up. They stood at the window for a while without speaking. Outside, the snow came down in the particular way it does at that hour, not urgently, not dramatically, but with a kind of patient persistence, as though it had all the time it needed. Same time as last year, she said. More or less. Different house, she said. Same kitchen. He looked at her. She was looking at the street. In the blue-white light before dawn, with the blanket and the coffee, and the unguarded expression on her face, she looked like herself. Not the version that sat in boardrooms or spoke in measured sentences to financial journalists, but some other, quieter version that had always been there and that he had watched, over the past year, learn to take up space in the ordinary hours. "Are you still tired?" he asked. It was what Emma had asked her, that first morning. He meant it differently now. She thought about it, genuinely thought about it. The way she had come to think about questions he asked with the same careful attention she brought to operational problems, except that somewhere along the way, the answers had become personal. "Less," she said, "considerably less." He nodded. Down the hall, the small feet would start moving in another hour or so. Emma would arrive in the kitchen wanting cereal and would ask a question about something she had been thinking about since she woke up, because that was how her mind worked, and the three of them would sit at the table in the morning light, with the particular unhurried quality of people who are, if not yet entirely sure what to call their life, at least sure they want to be in it. Daniel drank his coffee. Outside, it was still snowing. Victoria put her hand on the counter near his, not quite touching, and then she did. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing, for the moment, that needed to be said. April came late that year, as it often did in the north, grudging about winter's end, but when it came with the kind of light that was different from what had preceded it, warmer in the mornings, longer in the evenings, with a quality of return. Emma announced at dinner that she had decided to add a fourth fish to the aquarium, and that his name would be Victoria, after the Queen and also after a person she knew, and that he would be the largest of the four, because Victoria was the most important member of the group. Victoria had looked at her plate for a moment, and then said, with the restraint she brought to things that genuinely moved her, that she was honored. She was still running the company. She had, if anything, more operational control than she had had before. The restructured board was genuinely functional, rather than merely manageable. She came to Harlow on Fridays. She and Daniel had stopped referring to this as any kind of arrangement. He had not reopened the question of his old career. What he had found, in the year since a woman had knocked on his door at 5, 2 inches the morning, was that the life he had built was large enough to contain more than he had originally designed it to hold, that small things and large things could coexist, that the quiet he had valued did not require narrowness, that it was possible to have been broken and rebuilt and broken again, and still, eventually,